There are moments in baseball that make you question what sport you are actually watching. Not because something illegal happened. Not because a rule was broken or a boundary was crossed in any official sense. But because what unfolded in front of thousands of people inside that stadium, captured on cameras from 17 different angles, distributed across every sports platform within minutes, was so genuinely unexpected that the first reaction from almost everyone who saw it was not excitement or anger or admiration. It was confusion. Pure, unfiltered, completely honest confusion. The kind that makes seasoned broadcasters go quiet mid-sentence. The kind that makes veteran players in the opposing dugout turn to each other with expressions that say, wordlessly and completely, "Did that just happen?" What Shohei Ohtani did with a water bottle, a standard, unremarkable, plastic water bottle of the type that sits in every dugout in every professional baseball stadium in the country, should not have been possible. Not in the context it happened. Not with the stakes attached to the moment. Not with Seiya Suzuki standing there as the central figure in what had begun as a completely ordinary competitive interaction between two of the most talented players currently active in professional baseball. And yet it happened. And the commotion it created inside the Cubs' dugout spread faster than any of them could contain it. Players who had been focused on the game found themselves unable to look away from what was unfolding in front of them. Coaches who are paid to maintain composure in exactly these kinds of situations abandoned that composure entirely. And Craig Counsell, one of the most respected managerial minds in the sport, a man who has seen genuinely everything that professional baseball can produce across a career spanning decades, buried his head in his hands. Not in frustration. Not in anger. In pure, helpless, absolute disbelief. So what exactly happened? What did Ohtani do with a water bottle that caused this level of reaction? And what was the bizarre scene that unfolded immediately afterward that pushed Counsell past the point of any available rational response? To understand the moment, you first have to understand the relationship between the two men at the center of it. Professional baseball has a complicated relationship with friendship across opposing rosters. The competitive demands of the sport, the reality that every team you face is trying to take something from you, creates a natural distance between players on different sides of the field. Respect is common. Genuine warmth is rarer. The kind of relationship that survives the adversarial structure of the sport and remains real and visible regardless of the score or the stakes is something that the baseball world notices when it exists. Ohtani and Seiya Suzuki have that kind of relationship. They share a background that creates an automatic bond between Japanese players navigating the particular experience of establishing themselves in American professional baseball. The language. The cultural adjustment. The specific form of scrutiny that comes with being an international player carrying the expectations of an entire country alongside the normal pressures of major league performance. But their connection goes deeper than shared circumstance. People who have observed them together describe a dynamic that is warm and competitive simultaneously. A genuine mutual admiration between two players who respect what the other has built, who understand the work behind the results, and who manage to maintain real friendship across the competitive divide that separates their organizations. That friendship is also, apparently, the foundation for a competitive spirit between them that operates entirely outside the official boundaries of the game. Which is exactly what produced what happened with the water bottle. The sequence began, as the best baseball stories always do, with something completely unremarkable. A break in the action. The natural pause that occurs during pitching changes and strategic timeouts, the moments when professional athletes are briefly released from the intense focus that competition demands and allowed to simply exist as human beings for 60 seconds before the next moment of consequence arrives. Ohtani and Suzuki found themselves, through the specific geometry of where both teams were positioned at that moment, within conversation distance. This is not unusual. It happens throughout the course of games between teams whose rosters include players with existing relationships. A brief exchange. A shared comment. The maintenance of connection across the competitive divide in the small spaces that the game occasionally allows. What was unusual was what the exchange became. Nobody in the immediate vicinity could hear the specific words exchanged in those first moments. But the body language was readable from a significant distance. The particular posture that athletes adopt when a casual interaction has shifted into something competitive. The slight straightening. The focused eye contact. The almost imperceptible energy change that people who spend their lives in athletic environments recognize immediately. They had made a bet. Not a formal bet. Not the kind with terms and conditions and official witnesses. The kind that forms in seconds between two competitive people who have found, in a moment of unexpected proximity, an opportunity to test something against each other. The instrument of that test was a water bottle sitting on the ledge of the dugout railing. And what Ohtani proposed to do with it was the kind of idea that only makes complete sense in the moment it is suggested, surrounded by the particular energy of two elite competitors who are momentarily freed from the structured demands of the game they are supposed to be focusing on. What happened next has been described by every witness in slightly different terms, but the core of every account is consistent. Ohtani picked up the water bottle. Examined it briefly with the focused attention of someone who has already decided exactly what they are going to do and is simply confirming that the tool in their hand is adequate for the purpose. Set his feet with the particular precision of a man whose relationship with physical mechanics runs so deep that it operates unconsciously even in completely informal contexts. And then he did something with that water bottle that nobody present had seen before. The specific mechanics of what he did are almost beside the point. What mattered was the result. And the result was that Suzuki, standing exactly where he had agreed to stand as part of whatever informal terms their spontaneous competition had established, was defeated so completely and so immediately that his reaction bypassed the normal sequence of competitive emotions entirely. There was no frustration. No competitive protest. No attempt to claim that the conditions were unfair or that the result should be disqualified on some technical ground. There was just laughter. The helpless, genuine, full-body laughter of someone who has just watched something they cannot explain and have no framework for processing through any conventional competitive lens. And then Suzuki said it. Loudly enough to be heard by the players around him. Loudly enough to carry across to the section of the dugout where several Cubs players had stopped what they were doing to watch what was happening. Is that even a valid way to win? The question, delivered between involuntary bursts of laughter, is the one that has been repeated across every baseball platform since the moment it was spoken. Because it is genuinely unanswerable. What happened in the Cubs' dugout in the seconds that followed is the part of the story that spread fastest and farthest. Players who had been maintaining the focused attention that professional athletes are expected to sustain throughout games, regardless of what is happening in the moments that fall between the official action, abandoned that focus entirely. The commotion was not angry. It was not the aggressive energy that sometimes moves through a dugout when competitive tensions spike. It was something more unusual and in many ways more powerful. It was collective disbelief expressed through collective laughter. Veterans who have been in professional baseball long enough to develop a genuine immunity to surprise found themselves unable to maintain that immunity. Younger players who have been carefully building the professional composure that distinguishes serious competitors from casual participants forgot to maintain it. For approximately 90 seconds, the Cubs' dugout was not a professional baseball environment. It was a group of people who had just watched something they had no category for, reacting in the only way available to human beings when they encounter something genuinely outside their existing framework. Coaches tried to restore order. Not urgently. Not with any real conviction. Because the coaches were also laughing. And then the bizarre scene began. What happened immediately after the water bottle moment is the detail that pushed the entire episode from amusing to genuinely extraordinary. Ohtani, having just defeated Suzuki in their impromptu competition in a manner that produced the question about whether the victory was even valid, did not celebrate in the conventional sense. He did not gesture or perform for the audience that had gathered around him. He looked at the water bottle in his hand with a brief expression of genuine surprise. As though he himself had not entirely anticipated that it would work. That expression, lasting perhaps 2 seconds before his composure reassembled itself into the calm that he carries as his default mode, is the detail that multiple witnesses mentioned independently when recounting what they saw. He looked surprised at his own result. And then, in what has been described as the moment that made Craig Counsell finally give up on maintaining any professional response to what he was witnessing, Ohtani turned to Suzuki, held up the water bottle, and said something in Japanese that made Suzuki laugh so hard he had to hold the dugout railing for support. The translation that has circulated since is approximate. The precise meaning shifts depending on who is doing the translating and what cultural context they are bringing to the specific phrasing Ohtani used. But the essence is consistent across every version. He said something that amounted to, "I didn't think that would actually work either." Craig Counsell is not a manager who loses his composure easily. His reputation across the sport is built on exactly the opposite quality. The ability to remain clear-headed and strategically focused in moments that would destabilize less experienced or less temperamentally suited people. The capacity to process rapidly changing game situations without allowing emotion to compromise the quality of his decisions. He has managed through dramatic playoff losses, through roster crises, through the specific pressures that come with leading an organization whose expectations consistently exceed its resources. He has maintained his composure through all of it. What Ohtani produced with a water bottle in the middle of a regular season game defeated him completely. Witnesses in the vicinity of Counsell at the moment the scene unfolded describe a sequence that has since been replicated in countless discussions of the episode. He turned toward the commotion, processed what he was seeing, turned away, then turned back, as though confirming that what he had observed in the first glance was actually real and not something his mind had manufactured. Then he buried his head. Not dramatically. Not as a performance for the people around him. The gesture of a man who has simply run out of available responses to what is happening in his field of vision and has decided that temporary retreat into the shelter of his own hands is the most honest option available. When he came back up, according to everyone who was watching him at that moment, he was smiling. Not the reluctant smile of someone who has been forced to find something amusing against their will. The genuine smile of a person who has just been reminded, in an unexpected and completely unscripted way, why they chose to spend their life in professional baseball. Because it produces moments that no one can predict or manufacture or replicate. Moments that bypass every strategy and every preparation and every careful professional structure and deliver something purely, irreducibly human. The game continued after the water bottle moment. Both teams reassembled their professional focus. The innings progressed. The competition resumed in its normal form. But something had shifted in the texture of that afternoon in a way that everyone present seemed to feel and none of them entirely had words for. Suzuki went back to his position, still shaking his head at intervals, the involuntary physical processing of someone whose mind keeps returning to something it cannot fully file away. Cubs players who had witnessed the dugout scene carried the residue of it through their subsequent at-bats, the slight looseness that comes from having laughed genuinely and without reservation in the middle of something that demands constant seriousness. And Craig Counsell, asked about it afterward in the post-game, paused for a long moment before answering. He said he has managed a lot of baseball games. He said he has been in a lot of dugouts during a lot of moments that he did not anticipate and could not have prepared for. He said what Ohtani did with the water bottle in the middle of a professional baseball game, in front of Seiya Suzuki and an entire dugout full of major league players and coaches, was something he genuinely did not have a category for. And then he smiled again. The same genuine smile from the dugout. Not performed for the media room. Just real. He said the question Suzuki asked afterward was exactly the right question. Is that even a valid way to win? Because the answer, he said, is that when it comes to Shohei Ohtani, that question applies to almost everything. The home runs that travel distances that the ballparks were not designed to accommodate. The pitches that move in directions that batters spend careers learning to track and still cannot reliably identify. The preparation that operates at a level of specificity that makes opposing teams feel underprepared regardless of how thoroughly they have done their homework. Is any of it a valid way to win? By every official measure, yes. By every conventional standard of what a baseball player is supposed to be capable of, the question lingers. Because Ohtani keeps doing things that exist just outside the edges of what the conventional standards were built to describe. A water bottle in a dugout during a regular season game is, in the largest sense, completely insignificant. It will not appear in any statistical record. It will not influence any standings. It will not be referenced in any serious analytical discussion of either team's performance. But it will be remembered. By Suzuki, who asked the question that everyone was thinking. By the Cubs players who abandoned their professional composure for 90 seconds and felt no regret about it. By Craig Counsell, who buried his head and came back up smiling. And by everyone who watched the footage and understood, instinctively and immediately, that what they were seeing was not really about a water bottle. It was about a person who brings something to every environment he enters that cannot be quantified, cannot be prepared for, and cannot be contained by any framework that baseball has developed across its entire history. Shohei Ohtani defeated Seiya Suzuki with a water bottle. The commotion it caused was real. The bizarre scene that followed was real. And Craig Counsell's disbelief was the most honest response available to a man watching something that had no precedent. The only question that remains is the one Suzuki asked. Is that even a valid way to win? When it's Ohtani, the answer is always the same.